The applause faded into a charged silence. Professor Harlan Whitfield smiled, turned from the chalkboard, and froze. In the middle rows, a young black woman had raised her hand. "What, did you forget to take out the trash?" "Use the back door, black girl." "I'm not staff," she answered clearly. "I was invited." He squinted, walked down the steps, and read her badge. Then he laughed in her face. "Hire. Are they running out of manpower or something, that they're hiring animals? Sit down, shut up, and don't embarrass yourself any further. Shoo!" Laughter rippled through the room, but she kept her hand raised. Behind him, every face on the panel slowly drained of color, because the young woman they had just laughed at was the only person in the hall who knew the answer. This was supposed to be the biggest day of Professor Harlan Whitfield's life. For decades he had chased one thing, the Beaumont equation, written centuries earlier by the French mathematician Pierre de Beaumont. 6 lines of symbols on a single page. In all that time, not one human being had ever solved it. Newton tried, he gave up. Euler tried, he called it a curse. Backstage, minutes before the lecture, Whitfield adjusted his tie while his publisher, Quentin Hale, watched. "By tonight, my name will be in every math textbook in America. I'll be the one who proved Beaumont right." Hale laughed. "Hundreds of thousands of copies, Harlan, pre-printed. We're going to be rich." "Rich isn't the word, Quentin. Immortal is the word." Whitfield held the prestigious chair at MIT. He had a major grant from the National Science Foundation. And soon his book, The Unsolvable, would arrive in every major bookstore. C-SPAN was broadcasting live. PBS was running a special. Reporters from the Boston Globe, the New York Times, and Nature sat in the press row. This wasn't a lecture. This was a coronation. The room was full. Hundreds of the most important mathematicians in America. Old men in tweed, young men in expensive glasses, almost no black faces, maybe a handful in the entire hall. One of those belonged to Amara Ellison. She was a second-year PhD candidate at Howard University, invited as one of a small group of young scholars by the journal Annals of Mathematics. Her name appeared on the program beside her photograph. She took her assigned seat in the middle rows. The 2 seats beside her were empty. They had not been empty when she sat down. The couple who had been there picked up their bags and moved several rows away. The man muttered to his wife just loud enough, "I didn't realize they were letting just anyone in this year." "It's the new program, Walter. Don't make a scene." I paid good money for these seats. During the coffee break, no one spoke to her. The other young scholars clustered near the espresso machine. None came over. A woman in pearls walked up and handed Amara an empty cup. "Excuse me, dear. Refill. Black, no sugar." Amara looked down at the badge on her chest that read Invited Scholar in gold lettering, then back up. "I don't work here, ma'am." The woman turned pink. "Oh, well, you should have said so." She did not apologize. She walked away still holding the empty cup. Behind Amara, 2 professors spoke without lowering their voices. "Howard, is that even accredited?" "It's one of those black colleges. They have to fill quotas now. Annals is letting standards slip. There's a real PhD candidate from a top program who should have had that seat. A young man I know, brilliant. Charity admissions ruin a field." Amara heard every word. She did not turn around. She simply opened her notebook on her lap and ran her thumb down the edge of the pages, the way a violinist touches the strings before beginning. The notebook was green and scuffed, its cover bent at the corners. On the very first page, written in youthful handwriting, were 4 words. For Dad. Amara's father had been a mathematician once, Dr. Laurent Ellison, born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. He had published one paper in a small French journal on the Beaumont equation. The paper suggested something no one else in the world had ever suggested, that the equation might not be one equation at all, but 2. No American university would recognize his degree. They told him his Haitian doctorate was, in their words, unverifiable. He drove a taxi in Boston for many years. He died of a stroke when Amara was a child. She found his paper in a cardboard box years later. That was the day she started the notebook. And somewhere in its pages was the answer Professor Whitfield was about to spend the next stretch of time pretending did not exist. She did not know it yet, but she was about to discover, in front of millions, exactly how much these men would do to keep that answer buried. The lights dimmed, Applause rose. Whitfield walked to the chalkboard and held up a piece of white chalk like a sword. Ladies and gentlemen, for centuries this equation has been the white whale of mathematics. Today, I am not going to solve it. I am going to prove beyond any doubt that it cannot be solved. Not by me, not by you, not by anyone. He turned and began to write the 6 lines of the Beaumont equation. The same 6 lines that had broken every mathematician who had ever touched them. Amara, in the middle rows, opened her notebook to a blank page. She wasn't planning to do anything. She was just going to listen. That was what she had told herself on the train from Washington. Just listen, just be in the room. But as Whitfield wrote, her thumb stopped moving. Because in line 3 he had written a minus sign. Amara's eyes went very still. She knew that minus sign. She had spent years of her life on that minus sign. She had found in a dusty archive at Harvard's Houghton Library that the original manuscript did not carry a minus there. It carried a plus. A German translator had flipped the symbol long ago. Every printed version since had copied the mistake, and nobody had ever checked. Whitfield finished writing. He stepped back, dusted off his hands, and smiled at the cameras. There it is, the most beautiful failure in human history. Are there any questions? He swept his eyes across the auditorium and smiled wider. He already knew there would be no questions. There were never any questions at the end of his lectures, only applause. As expected, then let me proceed to the proof of A hand went up. Whitfield stopped. He turned slowly, scanning the rows. Then he saw her. Amara, hand in the air, calm. The smile on his face changed shape. It did not disappear. It grew smaller. It grew colder. Yes? Did you have a comment, miss? Perhaps about the lighting in the room? The audience laughed. Amara stood. Her voice was steady. There's a sign error in line 3. The laughter stopped. For a long moment, no one in the hall made a sound. Even the camera operators stopped shifting their feet. Whitfield blinked. Then he let out a small, sharp laugh. A sign error? Yes. In my equation? In Beaumont's equation, Professor, not yours. The one on the board is wrong. The room shifted. Hundreds of bodies leaned forward. The cameraman aimed closer. A reporter in the press row stopped writing and simply stared. Whitfield set his chalk down on the tray, very slowly. He walked to the edge of the stage and looked at Amara the way a man looks at a child who has wandered onto a freeway. By all means, miss, come down, take the chalk, correct me. Dr. Vivian Langford leaned into her microphone. Harlan, perhaps we should... No, Vivian. The young woman has an objection. Let's give her the floor she clearly believes she deserves. After all, she was invited. He said the word invited the way a man says the word cockroach. Amara closed her notebook and set it on her seat. She did not need it. She stepped into the aisle, and row after row of strangers turned in their seats to watch a young PhD student walk toward a chalkboard that had defeated every mathematician for centuries. The cameras followed her down. So did Whitfield's eyes. And in those eyes, for the first time all morning, was something other than contempt. It was the very beginning of fear. Amara walked down the center aisle, counting the rows in her head. Not because she needed to, but because her grandmother had told her, when she was young and scared, to count something, anything. Her feet would follow the numbers. She was counting her feet. In her head, she could still hear her high school math teacher, Mrs. Patterson, standing at a chalkboard and telling the whole class, "Amara, sweetie, math just isn't your subject. Have you thought about nursing?" She had been a teenager. She had already solved problems Mrs. Patterson could not. Step by step, the cameras turned their red eyes toward her. Reporters in the press row began writing. Somewhere across the country, people looked up from what they were doing. Millions were now watching one young woman walk toward a chalkboard. She reached the front. Whitfield stood by the lectern, arms folded across his chest. He gestured at the board like a host gesturing at a buffet. "The chalk is right there, miss. Don't be shy." Amara picked up the chalk. She did not look at Whitfield. She did not look at the panel. She did not look at the cameras. She looked at the board. She walked to a clean section on the far right of his work. She did not touch his equation. She did not erase a single mark. Instead, she rewrote line 3 from scratch. She copied the line exactly, but in one place where Whitfield had written a minus, she wrote a plus. Then she turned to face the room. Her voice was quiet, but the microphone clipped to her collar caught every word, and millions heard her clearly. The original Beaumont manuscript is held in a private archive in Lyon, France. There's a digital scan available through the Houghton Library at Harvard. On the appropriate page, in Beaumont's own handwriting, this term is positive. She tapped the plus sign with her chalk. Long ago, a German translator misread the symbol. He wrote a minus instead of a plus. Every printed version of the Beaumont equation since then has been copied from that mistaken version, including yours, Professor. She paused. For generations, and no one ever checked the original. The auditorium did not move. Whitfield's smile remained, but his lips had gone white at the corners. That's a charming bit of historical trivia, young lady, but mathematics does not care about manuscripts. Minus or plus, the equation is still unsolvable. So your little correction is, with respect, completely irrelevant. From the panel table, Dr. Sebastian Rowe leaned slowly into his microphone. He was older, a Fields medalist who had not spoken in hours. The whole room turned to look at him. Actually, Harlan, it might be very relevant. The minus sign creates a self-canceling term. That's part of why the equation has been considered unsolvable. With a plus sign, the structure changes significantly. Whitfield's head turned toward him slowly. Sebastian, surely you are not suggesting. I am suggesting, Harlan, that we should hear what the young woman has to say. The room exhaled all at once. Amara, still holding the chalk, turned back to the board. She did not gloat, she did not even smile. She simply drew a small picture in the corner that anyone could understand. 2 paths. The first was a circle that closed in on itself like a snake eating its own tail. She labeled it minus. The second was an open curve, like a road heading off into the distance. She labeled it plus. She pointed at the circle. This is what Beaumont's equation looks like with a minus sign. It collapses into itself. That is why, for centuries, every mathematician who has tried to solve it has been chasing his own tail. The equation eats itself. She pointed at the road. This is what it looks like with a plus sign. The equation is still very hard, but it has a door, and every door can eventually be opened. A reporter in the press row whispered, "My God." Whitfield's face was no longer pale. It was red. His voice came out tight. "And I suppose, miss, you have walked through this door yourself?" "Yes, Professor." "In your studies at Howard?" "Yes." "Then perhaps you would do us the honor of walking us through it. In front of these cameras, in front of every mathematician in America right now, live." Dr. Langford leaned forward. "Harlan, that's not reasonable." "It is perfectly reasonable, Vivian. If she has solved a centuries-old problem, she should be eager to share. How long does she need? An hour?" He smiled at Amara. The smile of a man who has just snapped a trap shut. "Centuries didn't seem to be enough for anyone else. I'll be generous. I'll give you a strict time limit." The room sucked in air. Amara stood very still. She had not come here to do this. She had come to listen, to honor a father whose name nobody in this room would ever speak. And now, on national television, this man was demanding she perform her life's work as if it were a circus trick. She thought about her notebook on the seat in the middle rows, years of work. She thought about her mother on shift at the hospital, who did not yet know her daughter was on television. She thought about her father. Then she looked Professor Whitfield in the eye and said one word, "Fine." The room exploded into noise. Reporters typed furiously. Phones lit up. On C-SPAN, the producer screamed at camera operators to zoom tight on Amara's face. The PBS anchor cut into the broadcast with a special bulletin. "We are witnessing something extraordinary at MIT this morning. A young PhD student has just accepted a public challenge to solve the Beaumont equation in the allotted time. We are staying with this story live." Whitfield raised both hands like a man calling for order at a hanging. "Quiet, please. Quiet. Since this is now apparently a competition, we need rules." Dr. Langford shook her head. "Harlan, this is not a competition. This is a public lecture, and you are—" "This is whatever I say it is, Vivian. The chair has procedural authority at the symposium. I'm exercising it." He turned back to Amara. 3 verifiers, Dr. Rowe, Dr. Langford, Dr. Cornelius Price. Each one must approve every line you write before you proceed to the next. If any single verifier rejects a step, you stop. Do you understand? Yes. And one more thing. He pointed to her seat in the middle rows, to the green notebook lying there. No notes, no references, nothing. As I understand it, students at Howard are taught to work without crutches, or perhaps standards there are different. A reporter from a major paper set down her pen. Dr. Langford's face hardened. Harlan, that's deeply inappropriate. It's a reasonable condition for an extraordinary claim. If she has truly solved this equation, she should know it cold, like any real mathematician would. The camera swung to Amara. She looked at her notebook. Years of work lying on a chair dozens of rows away. She thought of the night she had drawn the curve, the kitchen window dark, her mother asleep in the next room. The moment she had whispered to herself, "It's two equations. Dad was right." She looked back at Whitfield. "That's years of work, Professor. Then prove it's yours by memory or step aside." Dr. Langford stood up at the panel table. "Harlan, I will not be party to—" Dr. Rowe's hand came down gently on her wrist. "Vivian, let her decide." Amara looked at her notebook one more time, then at the chalkboard, then at Whitfield. "Fine." The clock above the projector began its countdown. Amara picked up the chalk. She did not start at the equation. She walked to the far left corner of the chalkboard and began writing something else entirely, something that, to most of the room, looked completely unrelated. Whitfield scoffed loudly. "That isn't even the same kind of mathematics, miss. Are you lost again?" Dr. Langford, very quietly, leaned into her microphone. "Actually, Harlan, it is the same kind of mathematics. She's translating the equation into modular forms. It's a valid approach." Dr. Price frowned. He had not spoken yet. He had been Whitfield's best man at his wedding. "It's an unusual approach." "Unusual is not invalid, Cornelius. Let her continue." Amara kept writing. Behind her, Dr. Price pulled out his tablet. He was not looking at her work. He was scrolling through a private mathematics forum. Weeks earlier, an anonymous user had posted pages about the Beaumont equation, pages that Price had read in his office at Métis, and dismissed as the ramblings of a confused graduate student. He scrolled to the date of the post, then back to the photograph of Amara in her conference program. His hand began to shake. He typed a quick message to the dean of his department. "Call me now." Amara wrote a new line. Dr. Langford nodded. Amara wrote another. Dr. Rowe nodded. Dr. Price did not nod. He stared at the tablet. Whitfield, watching, leaned over to his publisher in the front row and whispered, "Quentin, she's stalling. She doesn't know what she's doing. We're going to have her on the floor soon. Make sure the camera catches her face when she breaks." His publisher whispered back, "Harlan, she just wrote lines that Langford and Rowe approved. They're being charitable. Watch." But the publisher was looking at the screen of his phone. His face was very still. "Harlan, social media just exploded. Someone is calling for your resignation." "On what grounds?" His publisher turned the phone so Whitfield could see. The hot mic comments from the two professors behind Amara, the ones about Howard, about quotas, about charity admissions, were now public. Someone in the audience had recorded them. The video had hundreds of thousands of views in minutes. Whitfield's smile slipped just a fraction. And the door behind Amara, the one no one had walked through in centuries, was about to crack open in front of the whole country. Amara stood at the chalkboard with a piece of white chalk in her hand and the weight of millions on her back. She was not thinking about them. She was thinking about a kitchen years ago. She drew a single symbol in the upper left corner, a small Greek letter, ETA. Years earlier, a teenage girl had sat at her mother's kitchen table early one morning with a photocopy from a French journal. She did not understand half the words on the page, but she had a pencil and a brand new green spiral notebook. At the top of page 1, she wrote, in careful handwriting, "For Dad." The first symbol she ever copied from her father's paper into that notebook was a small Greek letter, ETA. Back in the present, on the chalkboard, she wrote a second symbol beside it, then a third. Dr. Langford gave the small nod. Dr. Rowe gave a smaller one. Dr. Price did not move. He was still staring at his tablet. Amara tried a substitution. She wrote 4 lines very quickly, then stopped and stared. It was wrong. She set the chalk on the tray. She did not move for a long moment on national television. In her head, she was back on the kitchen floor, sitting with her back against the refrigerator, the green notebook, face down beside her, her head in her hands. She had been stuck on this exact substitution for days that week, days of sleeping little and crying into her tea. She had thought then, I am not smart enough. My father was not smart enough. We are not smart enough for this, are not smart. She had been wrong. Weeks later, she had found the way through. She knew the way through. She just had to remember. She picked up the chalk, erased the 4 lines, and tried again. Dr. Langford nodded. Whitfield stood by the lectern, arms folded, watching her with the patient expression of a hunter watching a wounded animal. You seem to be having difficulty, miss. I'm thinking, Professor. That's exactly what I'm worried about. A reporter in the press row coughed to cover a laugh. Dr. Langford turned and stared at the reporter until he stopped. Amara walked back to the original equation on Whitfield's side of the board. She did not erase his work. She circled a single symbol in the 3rd line, a small superscript. She turned to face the room. There is a second error. The auditorium went silent. In the old translation, the translator also dropped an exponent, a superscript 2. It is in the original Beaumont manuscript. It is missing from every printed version of the equation since then, including the version in Professor Whitfield's textbook, including the version on this board. She wrote the missing exponent in. Dr. Price set down his tablet. His face had gone the color of paper. He was not looking at Amara. He was scrolling through a scanned copy of the original manuscript, a document he had taught from for years, a document he had apparently never once read in the original. Years earlier, a young woman named Amara Ellison had sat in a reading room at Harvard's Houghton Library in front of a microfilm machine. The librarian who helped her was an older black woman named Mrs. Clara Jennings. Mrs. Jennings had brought Amara a cardboard archive box that had not been opened in years. She set it down and said, I've been waiting for someone to ask for this for years. Amara opened the box. Inside was a leather binder. Inside the binder was a scan of the manuscript page. She sat in that reading room for hours that day. She left at closing time with her hands shaking. 2 days later, she returned. Mrs. Jennings was waiting at the desk. You found it, didn't you, child? I think I did. Then go finish what your father started. Mrs. Jennings had read Dr. Laurent Ellison's paper. She had been waiting for someone with his name to walk into her reading room, back in the present on the chalkboard at MIT. Amara was writing the exponent that had been dropped. Whitfield saw Price's face. He saw the tablet. He saw his publisher putting his phone away with a worried expression. He stepped forward. Even with both corrections, miss, the equation has a fundamental obstruction at the boundary. I can demonstrate it in a few lines. Watch. He grabbed a fresh piece of chalk and wrote 3 lines very fast. They were elegant, precise. The work of a man who had spent decades inside this equation. He stepped back and gestured at his own work. There, the boundary divergence. Refute that, miss. Amara did not look at Whitfield. She looked at Dr. Rowe. Dr. Rowe, with your permission, may I introduce a geometric interpretation? Dr. Rowe's eyes did not move from her face. You may. She walked to a clean section of the board. She did not write equations. She drew the entire Beaumont equation as a curve in space, a long, looping, beautiful curve. And at the place where Whitfield's boundary divergence had appeared as a wall of symbols, Amara drew in the language of geometry 2 curves that came toward each other, touched at a single point, and then separated and went their own ways. The room did not laugh. The room did not breathe. A reporter said audibly, "Oh." Whitfield took off his jacket. Sweat was visible on his collar. Amara paused and stepped back from the board. She had seen something. She turned to the room. This equation is not one equation. The words landed in the hall like a stone dropped into still water. Whitfield laughed. It came out high and sharp. Wrong. I beg your pardon? It is 2. It is what? 2 equations joined by a notation that has been misread for centuries. The room did not move. Even the C-SPAN producer stopped speaking into his headset. Amara walked to the original equation. She tapped a small mark in the second line, a mark that in every textbook since the manuscript had been read as a multiplication dot. In Beaumont's original handwriting, this is not a dot. It is a notation he used to separate 2 parallel expressions. By the time editors typeset his work long ago, the meaning had been lost. They saw a dot. They turned a pair into a product. She paused. For generations, every mathematician in the world has been trying to solve one equation. There is no one equation. There never was. Dr. Price stood up from the panel table. He did not say anything. He walked fast to the back of the room and pulled out his phone. Whitfield watched him go. Something in his jaw began to twitch. This is wild speculation. This is conjecture. This is not mathematics. It's in the manuscript, Professor. The library has a public scan. It has been online for years. Dr. Langford from the panel said quietly, "I'm pulling it up now." She turned her laptop screen toward the camera. The image of the manuscript page in Beaumont's own handwriting filled the broadcast feed. The notation Amara described was visible, clear, undeniable. The auditorium let out a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a moan. The sound of hundreds of people realizing at the same time that everything they had been taught was wrong. Whitfield's major grant, his book, his prestigious chair, his decades of lectures, all of it rested on the idea that Beaumont had written one equation. He stood very still. His mouth opened. No sound came out. In the front row, his publisher Quentin picked up his phone and walked fast out a side door. He was already dialing the press office. Hundreds of thousands of pre-printed copies sitting in a warehouse were about to become hundreds of thousands of problems. Amara did not look at any of them. She turned back to the board. She had little time left before she would know if she was about to win or be destroyed in front of her mother. And in that moment, with the chalk in her hand, she did not feel powerful. She felt young. A side door at the back of the auditorium opened. Provost Lionel Drayton walked in. Charcoal suit, 2 security officers behind him. He did not go to the podium. He went straight to the panel table and bent down to whisper in Dr. Rowe's ear. The cameras caught it anyway. Lip readers on social media caught it. Within moments, his words were on every screen in America. "Sebastian, this is a national embarrassment. We are pulling her off the floor." Dr. Rowe spoke into his microphone calmly. "Lionel, we are in the middle of a verified demonstration. I cannot allow you to interrupt." Drayton straightened up. He turned to the cameras. "Ms. Ellison, with respect, this has gone on long enough. Your advisor at Howard has not been contacted. We are pausing this event and reaching out to Howard before we continue, for your protection." Amara, at the chalkboard, set the chalk down. Her hand was shaking. She knew what "for your protection" meant. A call to her department, a written report, her name in an academic incident file, her career built for years in her mother's kitchen at all hours ending in this auditorium today. It meant her father had been right twice, about the equation and about what America did to people like them. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. The camera caught it. A single tear ran down her face and fell onto the top of her shoe. She did not wipe it away. In a hospital break room, her mother, still in scrubs from her night shift, put her hand over her mouth and slid down the wall to the floor. In the middle rows on the empty seat, the green notebook sat unopened. Years of work. A few feet away. For a long moment, millions of people watched a black woman look at a notebook she was not permitted to open. They understood, all of them, that the entire answer was sitting on that chair. Whitfield at the lectern smiled, a small, tight smile, the smile of a man being rescued. "Lionel is right. This has been a remarkable amateur effort, but we should adjourn." Dr. Langford stood up at the panel table. She did not whisper. "No." The room turned to her. "I have verified every line she has written. So has Sebastian. She is moments from a complete solution. If you stop her now, Lionel, I will resign from this faculty by the end of the day, and I will tell every reporter in this room exactly why." Drayton's mouth opened. He looked at the press row. He looked at the cameras. Dr. Rowe leaned slowly into his microphone. "Lionel, the mathematics does not care who holds the chalk. Let her finish." The room held its breath. Drayton took a step back. He looked at the security officers. He looked at his own reflection in the side of the panel table. He stepped back again. He did not say anything. He walked to a chair on the side of the auditorium and sat down. Amara did not pick up the chalk yet. She looked at Dr. Rowe. Dr. Rowe looked back and gave her one small nod, the nod of a man who had been quietly hoping for this moment without knowing whom he was hoping for. Amara reached for the chalk. Her hand was steady again. On the panel table, Dr. Langford sat back down, opened her laptop, and quietly emailed editors at 3 major journals. One sentence each. You are going to want to be watching this. The auditorium fell completely silent. The cameras held on Amara's hand. The chalk touched the board. Amara wrote one line, then another. She was no longer remembering. She was simply transcribing what she had known for a long time. She drew a vertical line down the middle of the board, splitting it cleanly in two. On the left side, she wrote the first equation. On the right side, she wrote the second. Two equations where everyone in the world had seen one. Dr. Price, who had returned to the panel table, took off his glasses. He cleaned them on his tie, put them back on, and whispered very softly, "Oh my God, oh my God." Amara walked to the left side of the board and began the first transformation. She took the first equation and mapped it onto a known result. A theorem about quadratic residues proven decades earlier by a Hungarian mathematician named Vera Halas. The theorem had been sitting in the literature for years. Nobody had ever thought to use it on Beaumont because nobody had ever seen Beaumont as two equations. She wrote several lines. The first equation collapsed into a clean, beautiful, already proven identity. A reporter from a major journal in the press row made it sound like someone who had been punched in the stomach. Dr. Langford, watching, said into her microphone just one word, "Yes." Amara turned to the right side of the board, the second equation, the harder one. She used the answer she had just unlocked from the first equation as a constraint on the second. She was using the open door to find the key to the next one. She wrote lines. The constraint locked the second equation down. It reduced, it simplified, it shrank. Little time remained. The room was not breathing. Amara wrote the final lines of the proof. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She wrote them the way a pianist plays the last measures of a piece she has played 1,000 times in private and is only now playing once in public. She circled the final answer, a single number, clean and whole, the kind of answer Pierre de Beaumont would have recognized centuries ago. She set the chalk down on the tray and stepped back. She did not say, "I solved it." She did not say anything at all. The auditorium was silent for a long moment. Then Dr. Sebastian Rowe stood up from the panel table. He walked to the board, older, award-winning, from a top university, walking the way men walk when they know they are walking into history. He read each line, top to bottom, left side then right side. He took his time. When he reached the circled answer, he stopped. He turned to face the auditorium. He turned to face the cameras. He turned to face Professor Whitfield. His voice was very quiet. The microphone caught everything. "It holds. Every line. The Beaumont equation has a solution." A long pause. The auditorium did not move. Rowe turned to Whitfield and waited. Whitfield stood at the lectern. His face had gone the color of old paper. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. The cameras held on him. The cameras did not move. Millions watched Professor Whitfield try to speak. When the words came, they came in a voice that did not belong to him. "The proof holds. The equation is solved." The auditorium did not erupt in cheers. It did something stranger. It inhaled. Hundreds of people inhaled at the same time. Then a wave of sound rose slowly from the back of the room to the front as the meaning of what had just happened reached every person in the building. A black woman in one of the rows who had been sitting alone stood up. She did not clap. She simply stood. The student in the seat next to her, a young man with thick glasses, was openly crying. In the press row, every laptop was open. Every reporter was typing the same word into the same email subject line, "Beaumont solved." In a hospital break room, a woman in scrubs stood up off the floor and walked fast to the nurse's station. She picked up the phone and called her sister in another city, her hands shaking. Marlene, you have to put on the TV right now." In the front row, Whitfield's publisher Quentin did not pick up his phone. His phone was already ringing. It had been ringing for minutes. He could see on the screen that the call was coming from the CEO of his publishing house. He did not answer. He simply sat in his seat and watched the woman he had, hours earlier, considered a diversity hire, finish a problem that had defeated every great mathematician in human history. In the back of the auditorium, two of Whitfield's graduate students were quietly packing their bags. They did not want to be in the room when the next part happened. Dr. Langford rose from the panel table. She walked down the aisle to the middle rows. Every camera followed her. She bent down, picked up Amara's green spiral notebook from the empty seat, and carried it back to the panel table. She did not open it. She simply placed it on the table in front of Dr. Rowe. Dr. Rowe looked at Amara. "May I?" Amara nodded. Dr. Rowe opened the notebook. He did not flip through. He only looked at the very first page. He read what was written there in a young girl's careful handwriting. "For Dad." He closed the notebook gently, the way a man closes something very old and very precious. He picked up his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you have just watched is the public ending of a piece of work that took years. I want to be very clear about that." He gestured to the chair at his side, the keynote chair, the chair Whitfield had been sitting in earlier. "Miss Ellison, would you join us up here, please?" Amara walked to the panel table. Millions watched her walk. The cameras did not cut away. Dr. Rowe stood at the panel. "Weeks ago, one of my graduate students sent me a link to an open mathematics forum, an anonymous post about the Beaumont equation. He said, 'Professor, you need to read this.'" He turned to Amara sitting beside him now. "I read it. I thought it was a postdoc somewhere, hiding behind anonymity. I did not know it was you. I did not arrange any of this. You walked into this room today on your own." He paused. "But there is one more thing I need to say, and I need to say it on the record." The cameras moved in. Amara very quietly spoke first. "Dr. Rowe, there is a name I would like to mention." Dr. Rowe nodded. "Dr. Laurent Ellison in a French mathematical journal years ago. He was the first person in print to suggest that the Beaumont equation might be a system of two equations. He never finished the proof. He never got the chance." She paused. "He was my father." The room did not move. In the front row, a man named Quentin, the publisher, dropped his phone. It hit the floor and skidded. But at the panel table, Dr. Price made a small, sharp sound. He was looking down at his tablet. He had pulled up a peer review file from years earlier, a review that had been rejected without revision. The reviewer's signature was at the bottom of the page. Professor Harlan Whitfield, MIT. Dr. Price turned the tablet around and showed it to the camera. The camera zoomed in. Whitfield had not just been wrong for decades. He had been the man who killed Dr. Laurent Ellison's career. He had reviewed the paper. He had called it in his own handwriting, unrigorous speculation by an unverified foreign author. He had rejected the work that contained the answer to the question he had spent his life claiming was unanswerable. He had buried Amara's father. The auditorium did not gasp. It went absolutely silent. Whitfield sat in his front row seat. He did not look at the tablet. He did not look at Dr. Price. He did not look at Amara. He looked at the floor. Dr. Rowe slid a piece of paper across the table. "Annals of Mathematics Joint Authorship Form. Harlan, sign it now, on camera." Whitfield signed. His hand shook so badly the signature was barely legible. A reporter from a major paper pushed a microphone toward him. "Professor, anything to say?" Whitfield opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. "The equation has a solution. I was wrong for decades. That is all I can say right now." He turned away. The camera held on his face for a moment after he stopped speaking. His chin moved. His eyes did not leave the floor. Dr. Rowe offered Amara a research fellowship at a top university to run alongside her doctorate at Howard. She accepted, but she said something into the microphone that the press would quote for a long time. "I will finish at Howard. They took me when no one else would." That night, Amara sat on the edge of a hotel bed paid for by her department. She called her mother. "Mama, did you see?" Her mother could not speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice was wet and small. "Your father would be so proud, baby." Amara placed the green notebook on her lap. She opened it to page 1. Her own youthful handwriting looked back at her. "For Dad." She closed it. She held it against her chest. She did not cry. She had already done that once on national television, for the man who had buried her father and for every door that had been closed on his work and now would not stay closed any longer. They told her the door was locked. They had built a career on that door being locked. She did not pick the lock. She did not break the door. She read what was written on it for years before anyone in that room ever looked at her the way her father had read it before her. And the way her father's father, somewhere in Port-au-Prince, may have read it before him. If you know someone who is being told today that they do not belong in the room they walked into, share this story with them. Put their name in the comments. Because in every city in this country, there is a girl with a notebook that deserves to be opened.